Some people think ownership is just a piece of paper, that with the right connections, enough money, and a few well-placed bribes, they can take whatever they want. They were wrong. The legacy I returned. For my name is Nathan Cole. For the past 15 years, I worked as a financial investigator, tracking money laundering, corporate fraud, and high-level corruption in some of the most powerful companies in the country. I wasn't a man people liked to cross. But when my father passed away, I did something I never thought I would. I came home. I wasn't returning for nostalgia. I was returning for the Cole Building, a century-old landmark, one of the last historic buildings still standing in the middle of the city's ever-growing skyline. It had been in my family for generations. It was more than just property. It was a legacy. A legacy I had every intention of protecting, or so I thought. The offer I refused. It didn't take long before they came knocking. A sleek black town car pulled up in front of my building. The driver stepped out first, tall, sharp suit, earpiece, a bodyguard, not a chauffeur. Then came Karen Monroe, head of the City Development Committee, a woman who had turned half the city into her personal empire. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Cole, let's get straight to the point." She gestured toward the rising skyline. "This city is growing. Your building is outdated. It's taking up valuable space." I crossed my arms. "And?" She smiled. "I want to buy it at a very generous price." I didn't blink. "Not for sale." Her smile didn't fade, but it changed. Less friendly, more calculated. "Nathan," she said, as if we were old friends, "I don't think you understand. This isn't just about you. The city needs progress." I exhaled sharply, "Then build somewhere else." Her expression hardened. For the first time, I saw the real Karen Monroe, the one who was used to getting exactly what she wanted. "You're making a mistake," she said smoothly. "One way or another, that building is coming down." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Over my dead body," she smiled, "if that's what it takes." She turned on her heel and walked away, stepping back into her town car. As the car disappeared down the street, I felt it. A storm was coming, and I had just made myself its target. The day. Everything changed. A few weeks later, I was called out of town on business. When I returned, I immediately knew something was wrong. The moment my cab turned onto Fifth Avenue, I saw it. My building, half destroyed, bulldozers, wrecking crews, a massive banner hung across the scaffolding, future site of the Monroe Financial Tower. I froze. My stomach dropped. I jumped out of the cab before it even stopped, pushing past workers, demanding answers. "Who authorized this?" A foreman barely glanced at me. "Demolition order came in last week. Permits are clear." I yanked out my ownership documents, shoving them in his face. "This is my building. I never sold it," he shrugged. "Not according to city records." I felt my blood turn to ice. I pulled out my phone, logging into the city's property database. I searched for the Cole Building. Nothing. No records. No ownership deed. As if my family had never owned it at all. That's when I saw her, standing across the street, Karen Monroe, a glass of champagne in her hand, watching from the balcony of a nearby high-rise. She raised her glass just slightly and smiled. I clenched my fists. She thought this was over, that I would just walk away. She had no idea who she had just stolen from. She thought she had erased me. She thought she had won. But what she didn't know, I was just getting started. The wall of corruption. I spent the next 3 days knocking on every door at City Hall. I wasn't asking for favors. I was demanding answers. But every time I hit a wall, the zoning department, the demolition was approved through proper channels. The land registry office? No records show the Cole family as previous owners. The mayor's office. "Mr. Cole, perhaps it's best you move on." Every file had been altered. Every record had been scrubbed. And every official had the same rehearsed response. Karen hadn't just bought my building. She had bought the system. The warning. I was sitting in a dimly lit diner, sifting through my notes, when a man slid into the booth across from me. Grey suit, wire-rimmed glasses, a lawyer. He didn't introduce himself. He just opened his briefcase, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it across the table. I flipped it open. Inside, copies of forged signatures on my building sale agreement, emails between city officials and Monroe Developments, a memo from a zoning officer, one I had spoken to yesterday, approving the demolition weeks before my father had even passed away. I looked up. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "You didn't hear this from me." I exhaled slowly. "Why? Are you helping me?" He leaned forward. "Because you don't get it, Cole. These people don't just steal land. They erase people. If you keep pushing, they won't just take your building. They'll take your identity, your finances, your entire existence." I stared at him. "They can try." The lawyer sighed, shaking his head. "I hope you know what you're doing." Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. What Karen didn't know, I closed the folder, letting the weight of it settle in. Karen had done more than steal my building. She had erased my family's legacy, and now she thought she had erased my options. She thought she had won. What she didn't know. I had spent 15 years in the financial crimes division. I had put men twice as powerful as her behind bars. I knew where to look, what to trace, and how to burn an empire to the ground. She had played this game 100 times before, but this time she had picked the wrong opponent. Some people hide their crimes behind ironclad contracts, erased records, and corrupt officials. They think they're untouchable. They think no one is smart enough to trace their dirt. Karen Monroe was one of those people. She thought she had erased every loose end, but I had spent years unraveling men like her, and this time, she had no idea that her biggest enemy wasn't fighting her with fists. He was letting her destroy herself. Step 1. Finding the missing records. Karen had wiped my building's ownership records from the city's database. But digital footprints? They never disappear completely. I made a call to an old friend, Damien Shaw, cybersecurity expert, ex-NSA. I told him what I needed. He didn't ask questions. 2 days later, I had a flash drive sitting on my desk. Inside, the original property deed, time-stamped before it was altered. Deleted emails between zoning officials and Monroe Developments. Approval signatures that matched no real government employee. In less than 48 hours, I had proven Karen had fabricated every document tied to my land. She had spent millions burying the truth. I had just dug it back up. Step 2. Following the money. Karen had power. But power needs money to survive. And money always leaves a trail. Through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and fake investors, she had funneled millions into real estate deals. But there was one problem. She had been too greedy. I traced 3 major developments she had funded, projects that on paper looked legitimate, until I found where the money actually came from. Illegal campaign donations to city officials. Unreported wire transfers from anonymous foreign accounts, land acquisitions that bypassed city approval because they never went through legal channels. Karen hadn't just cheated the system. She had committed financial fraud on a scale big enough to send her to prison for life. Step 3. Letting her incriminate herself. I needed one final piece, a confession, but Karen was too smart to put anything in writing, so I did the next best thing. I let her talk. A tiny recording device planted inside a decorative vase in her office. A second mic hidden in the high-end chandelier above her conference table. A third inside a pen gifted to one of her executives. Then I waited. And Karen? She made it too easy. Within a week, I had recordings of her laughing about bribing city officials, mocking homeowners she had displaced, and openly discussing fraudulent land deals. She didn't just admit to her crimes, she boasted about them. The celebration. Before the fall, while I was silently dismantling her empire, Karen was throwing a victory party, a lavish rooftop gala, champagne flowing, politicians shaking hands. She stood at the podium, flashing her signature arrogant smile, and declared, "This is a new era for our city, a future built on ambition and vision." Applause, cheers. She thought she had already won. She thought I was out of the picture. She had no idea that by the time she finished her speech, I had already sent everything to the FBI, the IRS, and every major news outlet in the country, and in less than 48 hours, her empire would no longer exist. The first strike, I started where it would hurt the most, the press. I leaked every document, every forged contract, every off-the-books wire transfer to the biggest newspapers in the country. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. City developer accused of bribery and land fraud. Federal investigation underway. Monroe developments tied to illegal rezoning scheme. FBI and IRS open investigation into Karen Monroe's business empire. Within hours, the damage was done. The mayor's office released a statement denying any involvement. Karen's business partners started pulling out. Even the banks financing her projects froze her accounts. The woman who had spent years controlling this city was now the most toxic name in real estate. The federal response then came the government. By noon, FBI agents were inside City Hall pulling records. By evening, IRS investigators were poring over Karen's accounts. Every fraudulent deal, every hidden shell company, every illegal transaction was now under federal scrutiny. Karen wasn't just facing bad press, she was staring down a prison sentence. The courtroom trap desperate, Karen filed an emergency motion, a last-ditch effort to stall the lawsuits, freeze the investigations, and reclaim her lost power. She thought she could still control the narrative. She thought she could stop what was coming, so she walked into court, flanked by her top-tier legal team, ready to argue her case. Then she saw me, standing at the plaintiff's table, dressed, not as a desperate landowner, but as a financial investigator. For the first time, she hesitated. I smiled. "Surprised to see me, Monroe?" She recovered quickly, masking her panic with a forced smirk. "You think you can win this?" she scoffed. I stepped forward, placing a thick legal folder on the table. "You forgot one thing," she frowned. "And what's that?" I met her gaze, calm, controlled. "I'm not just a property owner." I leaned in slightly. "I used to investigate people like you for a living." Silence. For the first time in her entire career, Karen Monroe had nothing to say, because she knew she had already lost. Power is temporary. It makes people believe they're invincible, that they can buy their way out of anything, until the day comes when they run out of money, run out of allies, and reality catches up. Today was that day for Karen Monroe. The moment it all crumbled. The courtroom was packed. Lawyers, journalists, investors, everyone who once feared Karen was here to watch her fall. The judge barely glanced at her lawyers before delivering the ruling. All fraudulent land acquisitions were overturned. Monroe Developments was ordered to forfeit all illegally obtained assets. A full federal indictment was filed against Karen for conspiracy, fraud, and bribery. Then came the final blow. "Ms. Monroe, you are hereby remanded into federal custody pending trial." Karen froze. Her brain was catching up to the reality that money wouldn't save her this time. Two federal agents approached. One pulled out handcuffs. The room went dead silent. Karen stumbled back. "Wait, no, no, no!" But there was nowhere left to run. The last thing the world saw of Karen Monroe, the woman who once owned half the city, was her being led away in handcuffs. The chain reaction. Karen wasn't the only one to fall. By the end of the week, the city officials she had bribed were indicted. Her business partners fled, selling off assets at record speed. The Monroe Financial Tower project. Cancelled permanently. Her company was forced into liquidation, selling every property, every asset, just to cover the legal fees and damages. In a matter of days, Karen Monroe went from a real estate mogul to a bankrupt felon. The building still stands. Meanwhile, my building, the one she tried to erase, was still here, and it wasn't going anywhere. With the city desperate to distance itself from Karen's scandal, they had no choice but to reverse their decisions. The Cole building was officially recognized as a cultural landmark. New preservation laws were passed to protect similar properties. Funding was allocated for historical restoration. The very place Karen tried to wipe off the map became a symbol of everything she failed to destroy. The final goodbye. A month later, I found myself walking through a federal detention facility. I didn't plan on stopping, but then I heard, "It, you!" I turned. Behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass, Karen Monroe sat in an orange jumpsuit. Her once perfectly styled hair was a mess. Her expensive jewelry was gone. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You can't do this to me," she spat. "You had no right." I chuckled. "I didn't do anything." I leaned in slightly, just enough, to see her fury rise to the surface. "You did this to yourself." Her face twisted in rage. Before she could scream another word, I walked away. And just like that, Karen Monroe became nothing more than a bad memory.